Thanks for coming on the Can of Files, Ivan. Can you tell people a bit about yourself and your role in organizing the unionization of Foodora workers?
Yes, so I've been a Fedora courier for 4 years now. I started May 1st of 2016. And as soon as I started doing this job, I fell in love with it. Thought it was super awesome. I just was a part-time summer type student, but then I dropped out of school and ended up doing it full-time. Basically, as I did this job more and more, I just saw that there was more issues with this job. Like there was a lot of safety issues in terms of riding your bike in downtown Toronto, as well as issues with in terms of how we were treated by the company with respect. Basically, I had a case wherein I broke my arm on the job. This would have been September of 2018. And I was off for 4.5 months. I couldn't work. And, that whole process just showed me that we're all very precarious and we're all in a delicate financial state. And things need to change if this thing is going to be sustainable, if this is going to be a real job that people keep doing. So that prompted me to get really involved in starting the union. So in January, we kind of got together with CUPW and started talking about how we're going to organize. And after a few months of that, we went public with the organizing drive. And, that's basically how I became an organizer.
All right. So for context now, what was the extent of organizing required to actually successfully organize the Fedora workers in Ontario?
Did you say what was the extent?
Yeah, what was the extent of organizing? Because I just want people to get a sense of the work you had to put in to get into this position of having a union.
Yeah, I mean, it was a heck of a lot of work. Can I swear?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, great. I love it. Yeah, it was a lot of work because nobody had ever really unionized gig workers, and even bike couriers have hardly ever been unionized. So we had to overcome a lot of obstacles just in terms of getting in touch with people, because we have no centralized workspace. Toronto is a huge metropolis. You don't just see your coworkers on a daily basis, right? And there's literally thousands of us. So the number one thing was just getting the contact, making contact with people. And how we did that was, since there's no connection, we couldn't do it, in a company space, we had to basically just go out into the streets, into all the hot spots. So all the popular restaurants, the popular waiting spots, the popular condos, or just ride around and basically start talking to people. You would see another Foodora guy. Hopefully they had the pink bag, but not everyone had the pink bag. So, it was kind of a matter of just talking to people that look like couriers and asking them about Foodora and how they like things. And then, having a conversation like, hey, I'm also a Foodora courier, and, I've just noticed there's a lot of issues with this company, and started talking about and learning about that person's issues. And then hopefully eventually, you get a contact, like a phone number, and can coordinate later. You can set up a meeting, and then, we had to be very down low about the union, because in that delicate state, you don't want the word to get out to just anyone, right? Because there's a potential that the company could, strike down on you right there with all they got, or, who knows? So it was very delicate at the beginning. We had we didn't know how many people even did this job, right? So we kind of had to guess. We were like, okay, maybe using hearsay from office staff, or whatever information we could gather, kind of coming up with an estimate of how many people were really active with this job. Not to mention the fact active is such a loose term in this job, because what is full-time, what is part-time, what is casual, when you can just sign on and off basically whenever you want. You could work 40 hours weeks for a few weeks, and then you could just not work at all, just never take any shifts, never sign up, and vice versa. So it could be very tough to find people, and it could be very tough to find, enough of a consistent workforce. So basically, once we felt like we had a large enough number, which basically once we gauged like 20%, we have like 20% of people signed up with the union, we decided like, okay, let's go public, because normally union drives, they only go public once they get 40%, once they file for certification, which calls into a vote for everyone on whether they want a union or not. We did it, so we went public when we had 20% because we wanted the word to get out. And we felt that going public would just bring more people to us, and it would just be easier to have those conversations. Everyone knows what's going on. And it did help a lot, but the thing is, it didn't really change that you still had to have those one-on-one conversations with people. So once we got to the point where we had 40%, which would have been July 31st of 2019, filed for certification, and the vote happens within a few weeks. So what happened in this case is there was a new precedent set, because it was the first time in Ontario that a vote on union certification was held online. And it was held online over 5 days. It went from like midday Friday to midday Tuesday. If you just sign, basically the government, gives you a password sent to your email, and it's just like, do you want to, here's your vote to join unionize with CUPW, yes or no? And it was like, we had that vote, and since then we have not had the result, because basically Fedora has put down all this litigation essentially against us as a strategy to drag this out. So the first thing they did was they said, you guys can't even have this vote. This vote shouldn't have even happened, because you're independent contractors, and independent contractors cannot unionize. So we had to basically fight them on that, basically saying it's not even true that we're independent contractors for all these reasons about how the work works. We have shifts. We're obligated to do these things when we're on shift. The employer has control over the whole entire mechanism of shifts, and how many shifts are made, how much are you getting paid, disciplinary action, firing people, they have all that control. So once that was done and the decision was made, which was only this February, now we are shown to be workers. We're employees of this company, basically. And the next thing was they were saying, well, you didn't get 40% because they stacked the list. Basically, the list that they provided the government was full of people who worked in the office, people who were management, people who were dispatchers, people who hadn't worked. So there were people on the list who was like had never done a shift, first of all. So they signed up, but they just never worked a shift maybe like 6 months ago, 7 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago, and they were on the list. So it's like, well, do those people really count when we're talking about people who actually work? And basically the process that was ongoing was proving that we got the 40%, because based on I can't recall, but it was either 1 or 2 months. If you had worked one shift within 1 or 2 months prior to that vote, basically your vote should count, because yes, you did work and you were working at that time. That's where we were at. So we were found to be workers, and we were just kind of in the midst of trying to get certified and trying to get the ballots open when this news came out.
Yeah, so obviously it's a good transition. So as you know very well personally, and a lot of people know now, Fedora decided to end operations in Canada on May 11th. So would you describe this as union investing? And if so, could you explain to the audience why this is?
You know what? This is very strange. And having thought about this a lot, I think everyone should take note that this is not, if it is union busting, it's a very strange technique. And the reason for that is, the reason why I call into question that it has directly to do with the union is because Foodora has pulled out of loads of countries. They pulled out of basically all of Europe. They were from Europe, from Germany, and they sold all their holdings in Germany, France, Italy, everywhere. And none of those had unions. Yet, in Scandinavia, Norway, and Finland, or the Nordic countries rather, in Norway, they are unionized with a collective bargaining agreement. And in Finland, they're unionized, but they're currently negotiating a collective bargaining agreement. So it seems like they're actually they're active in a lot of places where they have unions. And they actually left a lot of places where they didn't have unions. So that's strange. The second thing is, by many indications, this was a profitable company. Now, we had many issues as workers with how this business was being run, not just in terms of our own wages and respect and safety, all that stuff I talked about, but just like how they treated the customers, how they treated the restaurants. You know, they took a 30% cut from all restaurant orders, right? That's basically how they get a lot of revenue. They had an exclusive contract with the LCBO, which is liquor distribution in Ontario, as well as the beer store, another liquor distribution thing, basically all government controlled. They had an exclusive contract with them. So if you wanted booze delivered to your door, you could only do it with Foodora, which is a huge stake in the market. Not to mention the fact we're in a pandemic. Everyone is staying inside. Nobody can go out to restaurants, but restaurants are still open for delivery, which means it's been a huge boom in this business right now. All the companies are booming, and Foodora was no exception. So they have this basically golden scenario for how to operate, you know, having the liquor distribution, having the pandemic ongoing. You know, I'll let you know, 2 weeks prior to this notice, the last email Fedora sent me was saying that they had to create more shifts because demand was so high. Okay, so it was strange, right? And then we get this notice. So what I'm thinking is that these guys, it's not even about profit. It's about not enough profit. Because Nicholas, I can't remember his last name. Nicholas, I think it's Osberg. He is the CEO of Delivery Hero, which owns Foodora. Foodora is just a brand. They're active in like 55 countries, just under different names. So this guy, basically in an interview that came out Tuesday, this was in Swedish, so I can try to link it to you, but I had to translate it. And what he said was, he basically didn't care about you know, being the most profitable, or sorry, just making money, because what he wanted is he wanted to be the number one within a market. He wants to, like, if wherever Foodora is, it's number one, which makes sense because Foodora is number one in those Nordic countries. They're the biggest one by far. Whereas in Toronto, they're competing with Uber Eats, and they are competing with DoorDash, and they're competing with Skip the Dishes, not to mention the Chinese brands like Chan Mao, all this other stuff. So even though they have this exclusivity, and they've been in this market longer than a lot of these other companies, I think they decided in Europe, probably without even talking to the Canadians, that it just wasn't good enough. You know, that it didn't matter that Canada was making money. It just wasn't enough money, you know? So it just shows you how sick these guys are. Like you would think capitalists want to just make money, but it's not even good enough for them, right? They need to have the most share of the market. So that's a very long answer, but to summarize, I would basically say that, you know, I think they saw that we were such a strong force and we weren't giving up through all the hurdles that they gave us. It was just apparent how much more power and leverage we had than they did. And I think, basically the guys in Europe just made a stupid call, and here we are. So, yeah, that's my thoughts.
Okay, so what are Fedora couriers or former Fedora couriers doing to fight back against this move? And how can allies and concerned citizens assist your efforts to fight back against this move?
So we're taking a lot of fronts on this. My cat just jumped. So number one thing we're doing is we're calling on them to reverse the decision, because we want to shame them for what they've done to us. Like I already said, this shit doesn't even make sense. So using things like all the social media channels and emails, basically customers in other countries, getting them to stop using services because of what they did in Canada, pulling leverage in other parts of the world. The other tactic is also we're taking this to the government level. So the Ontario government, that would obviously generally regulates labor, and the federal government, what we've been doing is we want them to basically change legislation, because firstly, it's extremely difficult to have a union, not to mention a union that is like ours, where we need 40% of the vote and we have no center for communication. We need to change the legislation to make it easier. I would also like them to make the legislation easier to start your own co-op, which is our next thing. Basically, the way we see it is we've been organized and we know this business in and out, not just talking about our own issues, but talking with the restaurateurs who are furious with how these companies operate. Not just Foodora, but they hate Uber Eats, they hate DoorDash, they hate Skip, taking huge margins from the restaurant owners where they can barely make any money. And it puts us all against each other. Our workers are struggling, the restaurants are struggling, but these companies are generating a lot of profit. So with all that in mind, why don't we just start our own co-op? Because the platform is not super difficult to make or acquire, right? We have a lot of issues with Fedora's algorithm that we wanted them to change and they never did. Now, if we make our own algorithm and we own that, we can make something better and we can always improve upon it, which was just a huge issue with this company. They were totally unwilling to change. So, that's another front, basically researching, getting in contact. I've been basically in touch with a lot of different co-ops over the course of this organizing drive anyways, just because we wanted to share strategies. And we had always thought, that this company at any point could pick up and go, right? Like that, any company can do that basically the way things are right now. So anyone who says like, oh, it has to do with the union, if we were certified, I guarantee you the first thing we put in the collective bargaining agreement is restrictions that would make it really hurt them if they left. Make it so they have to pay out all the workers, which is the last thing. We're not going to let them get away with this. When Fedora left Australia, which they announced rather suddenly, somewhat like we did, the transport union got involved, and basically they fought to make sure that all the couriers were creditors in the company. And what that meant is the big pot of money that Foodora had there, they say they're bankrupt here. I think that's, like I've said, I think that's bullshit. But they're saying they're bankrupt, but there is money there. If we are all creditors, we all get a stake in that. And since we're mostly couriers, we're the biggest part of the employees, even though they don't call us employees, we're the biggest section of employees in this company, then we will each get a big share of that. So what happened in Australia is basically all the workers, after all the litigation was said and done, they ended up getting 10, 20K each because of what this company did to them for pulling out. So, we're looking at the co-op model. We're looking at getting compensation for all the workers. We're calling on the government to change things. And we're just going to do everything we can to make it a living hell for these guys from now on.
Yeah, and so actually I was planning to ask you about cooperatives, and you perfectly answered that. So what cooperatives are you maybe taking some inspiration from?
So funnily enough, a lot of people who were original like OG Foodora couriers, or even Courier, which was a company that Toronto startup that Foodora bought back in 2015, rebranded and became Foodora. A lot of people from that era basically went to a courier company co-op here in Toronto called Send It Courier, and they've been operating, for a long time. They do basically mostly the messengering stuff, like the traditional like parcels and paper, we would say, but definitely taking a lot of advice and inspiration from them, as well as I got in touch with a co-op organization in France that basically helps organize courier co-ops across the world, as well as two in Spain, one in Barcelona and I think the other in Madrid, who basically, from similar circumstances, started their own co-op. They were tired of companies in Spain. The big company there was Global. And Global has this horrible track record of how they treat their workers. 4 couriers died on the job in that country, I think in Barcelona, just, getting hit by trucks and that kind of thing. So workers, they were totally fed up with how things were. And what they were just like, we're going to start our own co-op. So those are the kind of people we're in touch with right now for how we're going to do this.
Okay, so just looking at it from a, let's just say, like a ordinary person, consumer side. So if a co-op is made, why should the consumer go to the co-op for these services instead of a traditional company? What's something special would the cooperative offer?
So a co-op stands for cooperative, right? And what that's referring to is everyone who works for the company basically has a stake in the business. Co-ops can run however they like to run, but the basic is that it's a more democratic workspace. So, a traditional company like Foodora, we have the CEO, Nicholas, who is a billionaire and gloats about how he stays in hotels exclusively because he gets tired of room service. We have these guys, and we have me, who, I'm always going to make the same bullshit wage the 4 years I've been doing Foodora. Why don't I, as a worker, have a say in the decision-making of this company when his decisions directly affect my life, almost more than the government, like we get to vote for the prime minister and we get to vote for all kinds of things because they affect us. The law affects us. Yet, when we go to work, we suddenly just fall into this dictatorship, and it's normal. It's acceptable. When in reality, this should be atrocious. We should be enforcing democracy in every aspect of our lives. And a co-op is basically that. So however those co-ops in particular want to run, you can get into minute details of that, but that is the fundamental. So what that means is a company that is, say, like a food delivery co-op, that when you order from that company, that all the workers know what's going on probably with the finances in that company because they all have a stake in it, right? And they all vote on decisions that affect them, the wages, whatever benefits they get, and they get those things because they know they can afford them. It's more transparent and it's more fair. So when you order from a co-op, you are supporting a business that is like that. So you are supporting a business that treats its workers better. You're supporting a business that is more transparent about how it does business. That enforces better relationships with both the customers and the workers, right? So I think moving forward, we're going to look at the co-op as basically the ethical option. And not to mention, I think coming up to be just a more, I want to say, just less bloodthirsty, blood-sucking option than these companies, because basically we'll be able to undercut these guys. Taking a 30% cut from these restaurants, all of them doing that, I mean, obviously how we're going to have to talk a lot about how these guys operate in the logistics, but I see a lot of holes in where they operate. I see a lot of water leaking into the ship, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of places where they're weak, and I think, a co-op stands a good chance of basically putting a dent in these guys, if not dominating.
All right. So, is there before you go, is there anything else you'd want to mention, or something that people know, or actions that people could potentially take?
So I would encourage everyone to support us by uh, adding all these guys on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. The main guy in Toronto is a guy named David Albert. So basically calling on them to reverse this decision. Foodora Canada, Delivery Hero. Those are the guys we want them to fucking hurt for this, okay? Next thing is we have a courier hardship fund, because a big issue that we were in the midst of trying to solve is because of this pandemic, and I already mentioned business being up and booming, yet we are considered essential workers, and a lot of people who do this job are non-status. So they don't have sins, and they're not entitled to things like getting health care. They would have to pay out of pocket if they got sick in a supposedly universal healthcare system like Canada. They also cannot collect CERB, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, which means that they are the worst hit from this loss, because as soon as this company's gone, they have no job. And we're in the midst of a pandemic. How are they going to get hired? When the pandemic's over and we're in a recession, what are they going to do? A lot of these people can't go back to whichever country they're from. They came here for work, or they came here to be students, and everything is so messed up right now. So what we did is we created a hardship fund specifically to support those people who cannot collect CERB. So we've been asking and receiving a lot of donations for that. So making an effort to donate whatever you can to the hardship fund, that's going to make a big difference in the lives of on-the-ground couriers right now. Lastly, I'm going to tell you that tomorrow, Friday, May 1st, it's a special day because, as I mentioned, it's 1 year since we went public with this campaign. And May 1st is a big day for workers in general, which is why we did that. And to really stick it to these guys, we're going to show them, because people need to know that this hurts people, right? People need to see that people have lost their jobs. And it's tough for people to see that now because everyone's inside. And COVID's dominating the news. So we are going to, without revealing too much, we're going to have an action tomorrow, a social distance action. And, I would say that showing all the support you can once we have this action, showing like this is powerful, and we're taking a lot of risks in doing this, because we don't want to go out without a fight. We don't want to go out just we receive an email and that's it. That's not how we do things. We fight for things. We want to change the legislation. We want to start our own co-ops. We want to we don't just give up because of that. So what I would say is stay in the loop with what we're doing. The point is that this shit is not over, okay? Fedora is gone, but we are still here. The workers are still here. The couriers are still here, and we are still organized, all right? We still have tons of resources that we've developed. We still have all these bodies that have been connected, all right? So what we put that towards, there is so much potential now. There's so much potential. The fight before was to get certification for Foodora couriers. It doesn't have to be that anymore. We're all couriers, but we could do fucking anything we want. So I would say that the way you guys can help for now is stay in touch, stay in the loop, connect with us, sign up for our public newsletter, follow us on social media, because we will be reaching out to the public for some things coming up. And just because Foodora has left doesn't mean we're over. So when we ask for, maybe signal boosting or coming to an event, you'll be sure to hear from us about it.
Alrighty, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and absolutely keep up the good fight. All right, thanks so much.